and welcome to Destiny Echoes with your host, Rick Tobin. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Destiny Echoes. This is Rick Tobin, your host. I've held off on doing this show for a while because this is so personal to me and one of the most intense experiences in my life, but I want to share it. For those of you who've asked about reincarnation, there's a bunch of you who've done that, and of whether or not I believe in it. My fascination with war started in childhood. The earliest pictures of me show me with a helmet, pith helmet in a box with a gun and so forth. I've always played with toy soldiers. Even when I was a kid, young child, I was organizing children in my neighborhood to stand up to bullies using the covers for garbage cans and having slingshot experts behind them. Yeah, that's just the way I was. My mother had a fascination with World War II as well, even though she was young during it. But my father, of course, served in World War II, and I was always trying to pull stories out of him. When I was a child, watching television, there was a show called 12 O'Clock High about the B-17 bombers, especially over Germany, as they were flying from Great Britain. I was absolutely devoted to that show. I would do anything to be able to watch it, and it was on fairly late. Model airplanes were part of my life as I was growing up, especially those from World War II, and tanks as well from World War II. I was fascinated with war games, with strategies, histories, battles. I began reading about the reincarnation studies of a woman from Ireland named Bridie Murphy. That interested me early on in past lives, but I didn't think about them as my lives. I was just interested in what other people were doing. My mother took me to a movie called Catch-22 at one time. I probably was too young for it. There was a scene in it where a side gunner in a B-17 was shot up really badly. I got immediately sick, not so much from the violence, but the reality of it, and I felt great pain. Later on in my life, when I lived in Tucson, I was actually able to talk to Ruth Montgomery over the phone, quite accidentally, one might say, and we talked about her book and the realities of reincarnation. I had remembered many of my past lives previously. One was quite painful. I was in a shower in Madison, Wisconsin, and suddenly the song Amazing Grace came to me, but it wasn't the same song exactly, but some of the tune of it. And I remember being in Lemuria with people as the big wave was coming in and we were holding their hands to steady them. I remember reading about monks in the Middle Ages and a very famous one and finding out that I may have been this person. I was also in a library in Madison, Wisconsin, walking through the aisles one day, and a book literally flew out of the racks and opened up, and it was about the temples in Bubastis in Egypt and the worship of Pasht, the cat goddess. I've also had living paintings done of me, which I wanted to find out what that meant, these people who could see things from past lifetimes, and they showed me as a Civil War officer for the South, riding on a horse, and then I was shot dead at the Battle of Chickamauga. When I moved to the South originally, I lived in Little Rock, Arkansas, and joined a church there, and I became close to a family. They took me in, and it turned out, and I didn't know this, that the family, which was much older than I was, had similar interests to my own. They loved Glenn Miller music of the 1940s, and it turned out he had served in the 8th Air Force, first in Africa and then in England. I had no idea of that when I first met them and got involved with them. When I was with some of my friends who did metaphysical studies in Tucson, Arizona, we were coming back in the back of a pickup from Mount Lemmon, and I was talking to my friend, and we started looking at each other, and I remembered that he was the pilot of the Messerschmitt that fired on my B-17 when I was at the side gun, and that he's the one that hit me and I was the one that had hit him. It changed our relationship in many ways. It was very hard to deal with that, the fact that he realized and I was telling him what had happened. And it turned out many years later when he had a daughter, his daughter was very precocious. And she told him when she was 4 or 5 that she had been a pilot in something called a Spitfire over Great Britain. So there's all these connections and ties that happen. In my memories, as more of this time of World War II became clear to me, I realized that I was the son of an expat in San Francisco. Now, San Francisco has always worked for me. It just draws me. It's a powerful city for me. I never could get lost there. I always knew where I was, what to expect. And over a period of years, I tracked a family down and a name that I felt close to, and I felt that they might be the family that I was tied to. They had a house in the Marina District. I drove in that area, and I was pulled to one immediately that looked like a cottage, and I just felt at home. I did track the name down of people, and I talked with them. And I'm not going to expose any people's names in this because I don't want them dragged into this publicly. Nobody's name. But it was amazing to find out that there was this relative that had died in a B-17 attack from Great Britain over Germany. Some of the things are painful about these memories. I remember the pain. I remember falling from the sky. I remember the dizziness. I can't get into anything that twirls or spins. I just can't. I just get sick immediately. And I also remember this blonde woman who I was very close to, and we were going to get married. And I looked into this remotely and found that I had left a child behind, and she never got married. It was just a tragic thing all the way around. To follow up on this and try to close out some of these memories, I thought I would clear it up by taking a flight on a B-17 when it came to El Dorado County, where I was living in Northern California at the time. I actually got up. I stood at the side gunner position during most of the flight. It was amazing, the feeling, hearing the sounds of the engines roar again, how tight the space was, how uncomfortable things were. And of course, I remembered when I was in that lifetime, I was much shorter. The B-17s were really not made for really tall people. They just weren't. Very uncomfortable. The strange thing is, as that plane came to a landing, as it was approaching and so forth, I got deadly sick on the plane. I mean, horribly sick. Other people who were there with me gathered around me. They thought something horrible had happened. I was going to die or something. And I couldn't face the landing. It was just beyond me. And they got me off the plane okay. When I was on the ground, everything was okay. And shortly after that, within months, the big elephant sat on my chest. I think I really pushed it too far. You know, this is one of the things that happens when you come back too soon, because I was born in 51. When you come back too soon after a death like that and what happened to me, and I remembered circling after we were shot up. I couldn't get out of the plane, out of the parachute. I was shot up too bad. We were spinning. We were on fire. We're going down. We hit the ground. I still wasn't in, and then the water came in, and I'm drowning and beaten up and all this. I mean, the pain is just beyond. And I wasn't supposed to remember all of that. But my body has had lots of problems in this lifetime because of that. It's weakened. It's had other issues and so forth. And that can happen when you come back too soon. Now, another strange thing that happened, after all of this happened and I had my heart issues and so forth, a gentleman came to my front yard where I lived in the foothills in El Dorado County. He came in and parked. He really didn't know why he felt he should come in and park in my driveway, except he had lived in that community for a long time previously. He was an older gentleman, really old, in his 80s, and I recognized him right away. He had been a captain on one of the ships I had served on. Now, remember, they rotated crews in those days. A lot of people, thousands of people were killed on the B-17s when they were flying these missions. And when a crew came back and someone was killed on the crew, they had to replace them. They would pull from another crew sometimes and split them up. So I had been on his crew, and I guess I had been pulled over to another plane and left him. And we started talking, and it was amazing. I even called him Cappy at one time, and he looked at me real funny. And I stopped. I realized, you know, I couldn't expose myself as being someone who had flown with him. It would be too much for him. But we talked about the Pelosi oil fields and what a screw up it was and what the air was like that day and how we got all that flack. And he says, how can you possibly remember? And I said, well, I studied it. But I remembered that flight, and I had been on it, and it was one of those clusters that the government did. They sent people in the wrong time. The intelligence was bad. It was awful. We lost a lot of good people. But here he was in my driveway. That's not the last one at all. And this one is possibly one of the stranger ones. I had a Chevy Beretta at one time, and I had a lead foot. I drove pretty fast, but that car was just deadly. I mean, it had all kinds of electrical problems. Not that I don't cause electrical problems with stuff around me, but it was weird. I could tell stories about that that are just beyond the beyond. But I'm coming down a hill on a very windy road near where I lived in the foothills, and everything went out at dusk. No brakes, no lights, no steering, everything locked up, and I hit an oak tree head on going about 45, 50 miles an hour. Bent the car in half, so to speak. It was really bad. I got out of it, but I don't know. I woke up on the side road, and I don't even remember how I got out. And later on, when they pulled the car away, it was clear I had kicked the door off of the car. I know that sounds impossible, but that's what happened. Well, I couldn't get in a car. We had another car. I couldn't get in a car and drive it for weeks. I would just shake real bad, and I would get real sick to my stomach, and everything would get dizzy, and I couldn't do it. And eventually, I got someone to take me down to an expert on PTSD, because obviously I knew what it was. I had the stress of that crash. I never handled it well. I never dealt with it, and all of a sudden it overcame me. Well, I went in and met this gentleman, entered this psych clinic from one door, came in, met with him. We started reviewing my life, and all of a sudden he took me to these places, says, open these doors, and we'll find out what's making you afraid and so forth and why you're having this. And we get to this door and we open it, and there's this fire, and it's horrible. And I'm in the car too, and there's gasoline flying up from the engine across the windshield, which was broken, and it's flying on me, and I think I'm going to burn up. And that was causing the PTSD. So he dug a little deeper, and we went back, and we were in the plane. And then it got deeper, and he wanted to know more about the B-17 and what was going on, and I started addressing him. And he had been there with me in World War II. I knew who he was. We used to go to the bars together because I was a Brit expat, so even though I was an enlisted man, I could introduce him to the locals and so forth, and it would just go better for him. So we would actually be drinking buddies. And he asked me, I remember from my dog tag numbers, I don't remember what I told him. But all of that came out, and we talked about it, and he cleared it and released it, and the PTSD went away. And as I'm going outside the clinic on a different door, I'm going outside the door, different side of the building, and there in a display window in the building is a model of a B-17. Like I said, knowing what you were in the past doesn't make you better in this lifetime. I feel bad now that I know, even though I was fighting Nazis, I helped bomb a lot of civilians, children and innocent people below me. And that is probably one of the things that's driven me to try to protect and save people in this lifetime. So just knowing a past lifetime doesn't make it easier on you. But I wanted to share you with it. There was so much information on this. I think it's a fascinating story and one worth sharing here at Destiny Echo.